Professor Sumita Parmar. I am the principal investigator for the subject of women's studies, and today I am going to be talking to you about the issues and debates in feminist research methodology. As I had told you earlier, this paper, paper number 12, has been divided into two parts. The first part from modules 1 to 14 are on women, science and technology, and the rest, module 14 to 20, are on feminist research methodology. Yesterday we had introduced the topic to you, and today we will talk about the issues. So the module is module 16, paper 12, and the module is entitled Issues and Debates in Feminist Research Methodology. This paper has been written by Dr. Narasimha Rao Kedari, who is Associate Professor in English and Foreign Languages University, Lucknow. Feminism is not a fixed category with a constant set of ideas contained in a singular frame. Rather, feminist ideas and practices are under continual negotiation and revision. So, also are feminist methods. Feminism and feminist research incorporate theory and practice, methodology and method. So, there is no singular feminist method. It is the way that a method is used that makes it feminist. Feminist methodology then is a perspective applied to a research practice with the political aim of creating emancipatory knowledge. Historically, the production of knowledge has been dominated by men, which has implications for the ways women and women's issues have been defined and the ways that women defined their own experiences. Traditionally, male epistemologies have denied the importance of the experiential. Feminist epistemology, on the other hand, is grounded in the lived realities of women's lives, though this critical perspective often locates feminist researchers as other in mainstream or mainstream disciplines. In the new millennium, many women throughout the world are campaigning, organizing, and working together to improve their lives. Their aims, methods, and interests are diverse, ranging from working for women refugees, campaigning against pornography, setting up women-only organizations, to demanding legal equality with men, improved maternity leave laws, and exposing the male bias in dominant forms of knowledge. The list goes on. These activities clearly do not constitute a unified women's movement. However, they all share an underlying concern with improving the situation and furthering the interests of women or a particular group of women. As such, they have all at times been described as feminist, and all may, in a sense, be seen as a response to or continuation of the feminist movement, which have their genesis as far back as in the 17th century. The status of feminism today is, however, highly ambivalent. On the one hand, it seems to be clearly a success story that has transformed both dominant ideologies and the material conditions of women's lives and that continues to inspire women throughout the world. On the other hand, its very success has undermined its appeal to a new generation in many countries of the world. Women all over the globe, young women all over the globe, see legal, economic, political, social, sexual, and reproductive rights and freedoms as obvious entitlements rather than as feminist demands. For such women, feminism can seem at best an outdated and at worst a threat to loving relationships between women and men, or an anti-male obstacle to genuine gender equality. Many other women who appear to be pursuing feminist goals reject the feminist label, which they see as elitist or racist, a form of political and cultural imperialism on the part of white Western women who are privileged in so many ways. Feminism is identified, according to Alison Jagger, as I just have mentioned, with various social movements dedicated to ending the subordination of women. It is also agreed that feminist theories ultimately are the tools designed for a purpose, the purpose of understanding women's subordination in order to end it. However, feminists are profoundly and at times bitterly divided, not only over political priorities and methods, but also over goals. Given the complexity of the nature, causes, and consequences of inequalities between women and men and their interrelationships with other social divisions, political disagreements among feminists are hardly surprising. These involve competing arguments and assumptions about the very nature of politics, the meaning of equality, the significance of sexual difference, and the possibility of social and economic change. The result is often an inconsistent approach to political activity and analysis, which confuses questions of style with those of substance and fails to distinguish between genuine political disputes and less significant differences of emphasis or priority. By the 19th century, a well-developed analysis of the ways in which women's subordination extends beyond a lack of legal, political, and economic rights and is rooted in family life and personal relationships was in place. For example, the American Elizabeth Cady Stanton not only campaigned for women's right to vote, to own property, to be educated, and to work outside the home, she also asserted their right to dress for their own comfort rather than to please men. She insisted on retaining her own given name. She condemned the double standard of sexual morality and identified a married woman's lack of the right to deny her husband sexual access to her own body as a root cause of women's oppression. This kind of analysis continued as an important strand in the campaign for women's suffrage, which had by the earlier 20th century become a mass movement both in England and the United States. Some campaigners did not simply see the vote as an end in itself, but as a weapon that could be used by women in their struggle for economic independence. Some also argued that women should be entitled to vote not because they were the same or as good as men, but because they were different and in important respects even better. After the vote was won, in the late 1960s, the analysis that women were different and better became an important strand of the new women's movement known as radical feminism, because its proponents claimed it went to the roots of women's oppression. Some, such as Germaine Greer in The Female Eunuch, first published in 1970, argued further that the roots of this oppression lay in men's control over women's sexuality. The politics of personal life. Greer aimed at raising consciousness to enable women to express and share personal experiences in a small and supportive group, so as to bring out their political implications and develop a strategy for change. Through such groups, many women found that their own bad emotional, sexual, or family experiences were not simply personal misfortunes, but seemed both to be widely shared with other women and to build up into a general pattern of male use and abuse of power. This new understanding gave rise to the key slogan, "The personal is political," and to the idea that all women could unite in a common sisterhood. It also provided the foundation for a theoretical analysis of male power, which focused on the concept of patriarchy. The feminist concept of patriarchy, a term which has an earlier and very different usage in conventional political theory, was first set out by Kate Millett in her famous book Sexual Politics, written in 1970. Millett argued that in all known societies, the relationship between the sexes has been based on man's power over women. It is therefore political. Men's power, according to her, goes deeper than the power based on class or race, and it is so universal, so ubiquitous, and so complete that it appears natural and, until named by feminists, invisible. It is maintained by a process of socialization, which begins in the family and is reinforced by education, literature, and religion. It also rests upon economic exploitation, state power, and ultimately force, particularly sexual violence and rape. While some feminists have attempted to analyze the patriarchal basis of state power or the relationship of patriarchy to class exploitation under capitalism, others have focused upon the family, reproduction, and sexuality. This has produced a wide range of collective activities, including campaigns for stricter controls over pornography, for adequate funding for women's shelter homes, for free access to abortion, for changes in the law on rape and domestic violence, and for an end to discrimination against lesbianism. The criticism against radicalism. The core beliefs of the radical feminist approach have been attacked by other feminists on a number of grounds. First, some argue that to say that the personal is political implies that no area of life can be free from political scrutiny, and that feminists are to be held accountable to their sisters for every aspect of their behavior. Women must therefore be aware of the political consequences of how they dress, who they sleep with, and who they cook for, and should regulate their activities accordingly. A second line of criticism is that the personal is political is effectively depoliticizing, as it can suggest that conventional political activity by feminists represents a futile engagement with man-made structures and is therefore a waste of time. From this perspective, women's political priority might be to put their own emotional and sexual house in order rather than attempting to change the world outside. Third, the concept of patriarchy is said to be descriptive and ahistorical rather than analytical. As such, it is unable to explain the origins of patriarchy or to provide a coherent strategy for ending it. Moreover, by universalizing the experiences of white, middle-class Western women, it ignores oppression based upon race and class. Fourth, the radical feminist approach is said to encourage women to identify only with their bad experiences with men, so that women who have suffered abuse will be listened to with reverence, while the experiences of happily married women are dismissed as false consciousness. And finally, the stress on women's status as victims is said to feed into a false and politically dangerous view of women as essentially good and men as essentially bad. It ignores the fact that many women do have a significant amount of political and economic power, and that many men are oppressed. This produces an inaccurate and unworkable view of men as the enemy, which suggests that they cannot be trusted as fathers, friends, sexual partners, or political allies. Lesbian separatism therefore becomes the only feasible option for feminists, both as political strategy and as a lifestyle choice. Such a view is unacceptable to those feminists who argue that many men have done great service to the feminist cause, and that many men have always treated the women in their lives with the greatest love and respect. What are the recent issues and debates? In 1996, a new international collection of essays by 68 self-proclaimed radical feminists provided a robust defense against alleged misinterpretations of their core beliefs. These feminists are not demanding that private life becomes political, but claiming that it already is. They see the identification of oppression as a first step towards confronting it rather than as an end in itself. Several contributors insist that their goal is not individual therapy or the development of women's culture, but their aim is to change the world with the ultimate goal of ending the oppression of women in the interest of all humanity. Such approaches suggest that there is no one correct form of feminist political activity. Robin Morgan, indeed, has argued that the very diversity of approaches and interests within radical feminism is a source of strength for feminist politics. She argues that it is a means, not an end, a process, not a dogma. Consequently, what a radical feminist in Brazil might consider her cutting-edge issue, for example, the nation's debt, need not be the same as that considered a priority by a radical feminist in Thailand, like combating sex tourism, or in Kuwait, winning women's suffrage, or in Sudan, ending the practice of female genital mutilation, and so on and on. Radical feminism's core assumptions have also been profoundly challenged in recent years by the development of both black feminism and postmodernism. Black feminism. Many critics have said that feminism in general has ignored the experiences of women of color, and that by failing to recognize or analyze racial oppression, it has served to support and perpetuate the inequalities of a racist society. The result, according to the African American writer Bell Hooks, has been that black women have felt forced to choose between a black movement that primarily serves the interests of black male patriarchs and a white women's movement which primarily serves the interests of racist white women. To some white women, the claim that the women's movement is inherently racist may seem odd, for many white feminists were initially politicized by their involvement in campaigns against racial subordination, particularly the anti-slavery movement in the 19th century and the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. For such women, there seem to be clear parallels between the situation of black people and that of women, for both groups were denied the rights of white men. However, such comparisons between blacks and women ignores the specific situation of black women. Because of their color, they disappear as women, and because of their sex, they are largely invisible as black people. Others have argued that those who are on the receiving end of oppression are more able to see it than those who are advantaged by it. This means that precisely because they are the most disadvantaged group in society with no institutional inferiors, black women have a special vantage point and a particularly clear understanding of the world. It is argued that a focus on the experience of women of color enables us to see the interconnecting and interactive nature of different forms of oppression, which opens up feminist analysis to other previously marginalized or excluded groups such as disabled women or lesbians. Postmodernism and its impact on feminism. Postmodernism is not a clearly defined theory, but a loose body of thought which draws on interconnected ideas around language, knowledge, reason, power, identity, and resistance. The term is sometimes loosely equated with post-structuralism. It is also sometimes used to identify the condition of late 20th century post-industrial societies. Cynics might simply see it as a symptom of pre-millennial angst. It is clear that while some of the postmodern concerns reinforce earlier feminist ideas, others seem to challenge feminism's most basic assumptions. Postmodernism seems to support many of the radical feminist ideas. Its analysis of the ubiquity of power looks at first sight very much like the claim that patriarchal power is exercised in personal life as well as through formal political institutions. It also rejects universal goals, which reflects the feminist assertion that such theories and goals have been used to conceal particular male interests. However, postmodernism seems incompatible with the identification and analysis of patriarchy, and therefore with feminist struggles against it. Though recent theoretical developments within radical feminism recognize the specificity and the variability of women's experiences, they also insist that these are interconnected and that society is fundamentally structured around men's domination over women. Postmodern feminists use postmodern ideas to argue that the very process of sex identification and classification is socially produced rather than an inevitable and unchanging outcome of biology. They therefore reject the sex-gender distinction made by many earlier feminists, for they saw sex as natural and only gender as the artificial product of society. In contrast, postmodern feminists argue that it is society that creates the category woman by attaching overwhelming significance to particular anatomical arrangements. It is society that makes them significant and gives them changing meanings in this sense. It is society that creates sex as well as gender. Although postmodernism has concentrated on discourse, some writers see social practices as important in constructing meaning and gender identity. Others have argued that gender is not a stable identity but an act that requires repeated performance of gender appropriate behavior. These ideas can be seen as liberating, but the meanings which society attaches to sex and gender can be challenged. They open up in principle the possibility of a much more open society that is no longer divided into the binary oppositions of male and female. According to some writers, they might even disappear. Thus, Judith Grant has argued that the aim of feminist politics is the end of gender and the creation of new human beings who are self-determining and fully participate in the development of their own constantly evolving subjectivity. We could think of this position as a feminist humanist position. Broader alliances among women are also possible from a postmodernist perspective, provided that they are provisional and tactical and they do not lose sight of the historical and cultural specificity of women's experiences. Conclusion: the feminist claim that women should have the same rights and freedoms as men has been largely conceded in Western society. Issues such as abortion, sexual harassment, domestic violence, childcare and parental leave have entered the mainstream of political debate rather than being seen as purely personal concerns. The importance of women's unpaid work has become increasingly visible in official economic statistics. However, feminist analysis of the structured collective nature of gender inequalities and interests are much less widely accepted or even heard. Similarly, Although there is a greater awareness that black working class or disabled women face particular problems, there has been little public debate over the full implications of this or of the ways in which different forms of inequality relate either to each other or to wider social and economic conditions. A critical awareness of the theoretical assumptions underlying feminist politics can help guard against an inappropriate narrowing of its frame of reference and help ensure a more inclusive political practice. Thank you.